It's time for the Rose Chat Podcast, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the world's most beloved flower, the rose. Join award-winning gardeners Chris Van Cleef and Teresa Byington as they chat with rose lovers and experts from around the globe. With each episode, you'll gain valuable knowledge and insights to achieve the rose garden you've always dreamed of. Listen now as we explore the world of roses.
Try Haven brand soil conditioners, providing generations of gardeners with a truly all-natural alternative to chemical fertilizers with their line of composted manure and alfalfa teas. Easy to brew and use on all indoor and outdoor plants. Find them online at manuretea.com.
Hey Rose friends, today's guest is Jason Croutch of Fraser Valley Rose Farm. Perhaps you know Jason from his very popular YouTube channel. Well, today we're going to tap into Jason's expertise in dealing with rose pests and diseases without using what he calls the hard stuff. So, hey, Jason, welcome to Rose Chat.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of the program.
Oh, good, good. You know, Jason, I feel like we've been friends for a really long time, but yet I know you the same way that so many of our listeners probably know you, and that's through the Fraser Valley Rose Farm YouTube channel.
Well, I feel the same way just having heard you on your podcast. So we may be familiar to each other, but this is maybe the second time we've talked. So that's pretty cool.
It's great. You know, we know that screen to screen can lead to face to face. So, but even if it can't, you know, we have gardening friendships that are strong and they work, even if we don't get to be together.
For sure.
So now you've had this YouTube experience, and we want to hear a little bit about that.
Well, I think it actually, I want to go back to why I started the YouTube channel, because it's been a few years now. And I think you have to imagine for my business, the humblest beginnings you could ever imagine. I was a backyard grower, a backyard nursery, just out of my suburban backyard, where I was growing plants propagating roses from my backyard and growing them on a pallet on my back deck, and just kind of imagining and daydreaming that might be more satisfying to me than selling office supplies and computers and extended warranties. So doing that, though, I mean, there wasn't a path forward except that I thought, well, maybe I would sell these at the farmer's market and at local plant sales and at events like that. And so when I went there with my roses, and I was very enthusiastic about them, but I think I found what many of your rosarians might find in talking to the general public is people are a little intimidated by roses. Mm-hmm. And so what I did is I started making the videos sort of in hopes that I could demystify it for them and have them see what I see in the roses, not as something complicated or scary or frightening, but rather as something that is exciting and easy to grow.
Well, you've certainly done that. And I think that's so true. I hear that all the time. I can grow tomatoes. I couldn't grow roses. But if you can grow tomatoes, trust me, you can grow roses.
Oh, absolutely. And, what I kind of tried to follow was the template of one of your frequent guests, is Paul Zimmerman, sort of that idea that roses are just plants. If you know how to garden, you can garden roses, no problem. And so that's what I kind of did. And it didn't come naturally to me doing the YouTube channel. I'm not a great public speaker. It's not something I enjoy, although I'm coming around to it now. Mm-hmm. But what I did find, though, is that the reception was outstanding. It took a couple of years to really get some traction, but within the last 2 to 3 years, it's really taken off, and it's helping me to make that transition from small backyard grower into growing as a nursery. So it's a lot of fun for me.
Well, it's a lot of fun, I'm sure, but it's being so successful now. If my numbers are correct, if not, correct me, but you have 147,000 subscribers, and you've had over 18 million views.
Yeah, that's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it?
But it's good. It's good. It's practical. It's sound. You can say to someone, be careful on the internet. You can't believe everything that you see or hear. But on your channel, you can believe everything that you see and hear. So well done, you.
Thank you for that vote of confidence.
Absolutely. And I've listened, well, I can't imagine how many I've listened to, but a lot of them. Okay, so you mentioned the farm. Let's talk about the farm a little bit.
Right. So we moved in about 7 or 8 years ago into a blank slate of a piece of land on an island in the middle of the Fraser River. It's a beautiful area, lots of wildlife there, lots of fishing, bald eagles, the whole works.
Great.
And but the farm itself came to us with some greenhouses, which was my dream. Had 4 beautiful cold frame greenhouses. Only one of them was in use. And I started filling them up with roses and perennials and other things that I like to grow, and scaling up the idea of turning it from a hobby into a business.
Oh, the greenhouses, what a bonus. That's so nice. A place to do all of this in. Now, a blank slate, I've been in my garden for 35 years. And it's anything but a blank slate, but it was when I came. And while it was a little daunting, it was so nice to have a fresh vision and to be able to implement it. Now, my biggest task each year is to add all the roses that I want and other plants too, and not completely destroy the design.
Yeah, it's kind of a daunting thing, especially when it's just that wide open. I think the really nice feature of our farm is we have a beautiful amount of borrowed landscape. Every direction you could look, there's a mountainside, there's a beautiful view, and so whatever we do on our flat little piece of land on the bottom of the valley, it's gaining that glory from the surroundings, which I love. And we've stayed pretty simple with design, but we've been adding features every year. I've got a couple of perennial borders that I've put in, a fairly large, I'm going to call it a dedicated rose garden. But I have to say, when I say dedicated rose garden, I mean, I'm putting in a lot of roses, but I'm also mixing them with a lot of perennials and shrubs and annuals and other things. And then we have a stock field now. That's the newest feature, is we started placing in the roses that we're propagating from. And I think we have somewhere in the range of 250. It goes a little up and a little down each year, depending on which varieties I enjoy and which ones I don't. But yeah, that's where we're at right now. And probably there's another 30 or 40 sitting in pots right now that I need to add to the field.
Always something in a pot that needs to go in the garden. That is the mark of a serious gardener. There's always something ready to go. There's something that needs to be planted. It's time to do it, but that time hasn't come. Now we want to learn from your experience of all these roses and caring for this farm. So you do it without using what you call the hard stuff. So share with us your philosophy on roses and their care.
Well, I think I have to start with the idea that I think roses get a bit of a bad rap for pests and diseases. And, I'm not saying they're pest free. They're as susceptible as the next garden plant to what I call the usual suspects, the aphids, the spider mites, the thrips, the caterpillars. And those are seasonal nuisances in veggie gardens and ornamental gardens alike. But people tend to think of roses as being this really, really hard plant to grow. And it's not true. They have a few pests and diseases that are more targeted or damaging to roses, just as there are specialty pests in like the coreopsis beetle for coreopsis, or the carrot fly, that are particular to other crops. So I'd say roses are sort of middle of the road there, probably because they're a fast growing and heavily blooming plant. They do attract a little bit more pressure from things like aphids, but ultimately they're not harder than anything else. I think the main issue is that traditionally there's been an emphasis on having these perfect roses that maybe isn't so expected from other garden plants. Like rosarians are passionate about their roses, and they definitely want to see their plants like super healthy. But I see a lot more support now for organic methods and people sort of scaling back the use of chemicals, and they're shifting away from trying to grow the perfect rose to just deciding to grow an overall healthy and productive garden, and roses can be a part of that.
When you were saying that about how much care a rose might or might not need, I was thinking of a spot in my garden this past year where there's a couple of roses, not a lot. I just didn't get to it. I kept not getting to it. I didn't water. I didn't feed. I just kept meaning to get over there, and I just didn't for some reason. So when I did start paying attention at the end of the year, it was a rose from the Easy Elegance collection that I love called Music Box. And I have lots of Music Box roses around in the other parts of the garden. So that's why I didn't miss this one. It was 8 feet tall, covered in blooms, and healthy as could be. And I had nothing to do with that. It went through a drought period and it just really got no care. So they need a whole lot less than we think.
They do. And oftentimes I'll see the rookie attitude towards roses, because there's such a fear thrown into people, is to kind of kill them with kindness, to hit them with the heavy sprays right away, to overfeed them or over-fertilize them, and really sort of lavish them with care. And oftentimes, if you back off just a little bit, you'll realize they want to grow. They grow well on their own. And really, you should be looking for, if you want to make those interventions, look for the problem first. Identify the problem very carefully first. My own attitude on my farm is very relaxed. I hardly spray. And when I do, it's like baking soda alternative, which is potassium bicarbonate or sulfur. And I do that because my family lives on the farm. And it's important to me not to use the heavy chemicals or the hard chemicals unless I absolutely have to. And so far, crossing fingers and knocking wood here, I really haven't had to bring any of the hard stuff onto the farm. One thing I will say is that when I went to college for horticulture, which was more recently than you might think, I learned about integrated pest management principles, and I carried those over to my own farm and garden. And the thing that they tell you basically is that bugs in the garden are not a bad thing. And even the troublesome ones aren't something you have to react to unless they get past what they call a tolerance threshold, which is like when they really go past the level that you can accept them, and then you have to do something about them.
I love that term, tolerance threshold, because it tells us that we don't have to have a knee-jerk reaction. We do need to give things some time, and some imperfections are okay.
The thing about biological stability in your garden is that your first line of defense should be standing back and letting the biodiversity do the job. Just about any garden pest you can think of has natural enemies in a diversely planted garden. Aphids go through a classic boom and bust population cycle early in the season, forming large infestations before their natural enemies arrive en masse, and then their populations crash as the predators move in. So you can help stabilize these cycles faster by doing something that every gardener I know of wants to do anyway, which is growing more beautiful flowering plants, shrubs, perennials, annuals. They're all good. But I spent most of my years as a grower, because I did that professionally, as in perennials. And some of my favorites are in this group. So perennials that associate well with roses, and you can plant them once and then enjoy them for many, many years. So that's the direction I've gone, is planting lots and lots of perennials around my roses.
So what are some of the companions that you would recommend that we plant to support the beneficials that we want to come?
Well, what I'd say is, just to simplify things in your own head, or at least categorize them, there are certain families of the perennials and plants in general that support beneficials in a big way. And the 4 that I'm going to point out right away, because you asked me to think about this a little bit, was the mustard family, the mint family, the carrot family, and the sunflower family, which kind of sounds like an edible recipe of some sort. But
I know.
But those are the 4 families that I would first look at. And let's take first the mustard family, because it's one of these ones that if you get enough members of it into your garden, they kick off the season. They are cool season growers. They bloom early, and that means that they help you to get the beneficial populations established super early in the season. They love the cooler temperatures of early spring. So for that, I'm going to use common names here. I'm going to say Iberis or Candy Tuft is a fantastic perennial, or there's an annual version of it that's more colorful that you can use. Rock cress, wallflower, and really, really well known in this group is Alyssum, which is just a knockout. And it's singled out as one of the best plants for attracting and supporting beneficials in the garden.
Perfect. You've made that so easy. You're breaking it out in these categories is making it so easy, because some of these I knew, but now I was not prepared that you were going to say alyssum was in the mustard family. So,
Right.
so there you go. We're going to learn something new today.
You bet. The next family I'd like to highlight is the mint family, which lots of members of the mint family are classic combinations with roses. Things like catmint, or nepeta is its botanical name, salvia, which comes in all sorts of colors and habits. There's one called agastaki, or anise hyssop is the common name, with foliage that smells like, well, depending on how you smell it, either root beer or toothpaste. And then there's monarda, which is also called bee balm. And the members of this family mostly have aromatic foliage that's credited with repelling or confusing pests. But the main thing is they're offering loads of flowers over a long season, and they pair beautifully with roses. One of the beneficials that I'll mention a little bit later on when we talk about spider mites is Persimolis, and it is particularly attracted to members of the mint family. So that's why I always have members of the mint family, not just because they pair beautifully with roses, but because they bring the beneficials.
Yes, they sure do. All of those are my favorite. You just listed all of my favorites.
Right on. Third family I wouldn't mind mentioning is the carrot family, because they have these little small umbel flowers that are particularly valuable to parasitoid wasps and hoverflies. And some of them look like the wild carrot that you'd see growing on the roadside, but some of them are far more refined than that. And I will mention masterwort, or astrantia, is a beautiful addition to the garden. Sea holly, or eryngium, is sort of that blue shade that it's like a steel blue shade that is just beautiful. And also another ornamental favorite of mine is bronze fennel, which I usually keep it in a container so it doesn't seed all over the place. But it's gorgeous, and it attracts tons and tons of these little parasitoids, wasps that are so beneficial in the garden.
What a good idea to do bronze fennel in a container to kind of keep it, from getting out of hand. It tends to be an overachiever. And I love these umbelled flowers. I have seeds that I'm so excited about. They're chocolate lace flower from Floret Farms, and I can't wait to see them. But I have to work really hard to get them up big enough to flower, because the bunnies love them.
Yeah, two of the pests I won't be mentioning in this presentation are rabbits and deer, because I don't have any good solutions for either one of them.
And I have a lot of them.
Yeah.
Okay, now for the sunflowers.
Sure. The sunflower is also the daisy family. So it's so diverse. Everything that you think of that looks like a daisy, but you might not guess that the common garden yarrow is also in the daisy family, and does a beautiful job of bringing in hoverflies and beneficials. Also another one, blazing star, or liatris, which is commonly sold as a cut flower bulb in the garden centers. Again, long season of bloom, beautiful spikes of purple flowers, and excellent for beneficials. Joe Pyeweed is a bold plant and a wonderful host for insects. So I can't go without that in my garden. And here, some of them, there's little pyeweed and tall pyeweed. I go for the tall stuff. It's like 5 or 6 feet tall in the garden. And there's one other one here is goldenrod, which people will say I'm allergic to goldenrod, and it actually is not commonly an allergen, but it comes out at the same time that people get hay fever, so it gets unfairly blamed for that. But it's an absolute hero in the garden, just blooming over a long period and feeding all those beneficials and really contributing to the garden, if you like that strong gold color, which is a matter of personal taste.
Yes, it is. But by the time that it's in bloom, I think we're ready for some of those bolder colors.
Absolutely.
Even those of us who are very fond of pink.
So those are the 4 main families that I jump in there with. But honestly, that's just a starter. There's also the borage family, the onion family. There's just lots out there that you can add to your garden. And I think you get the point, is that the more diversity of flowers, especially those that bloom early or carry clusters of small flowers, they fill in those gaps in the garden and they stabilize the predator populations.
So helpful. But what if the pest population gets out of control anyway and the bad guys start winning?
Yeah, and that's always a risk. So I want to return to that concept of the tolerance threshold, because with these most common pests, even if you do practice diversity, the populations can sometimes boom or spike to the point where you need to do something about it. And I want to say about that tolerance threshold that it can be different for each gardener. If you're producing cut flowers or preparing roses for an exhibition, you might be inclined to take action at the first sign of pests. Whereas if you're like me and you're letting them live in the landscape, and if their visitors see them not at exactly their best, I don't mind that. So you might be inclined to be a little more tolerant of them. But a few of the usual suspects here, let's say the aphids, and as a group, the aphids are large compared to other pests. They're slow and they're dumb. I like to think of them as big, dumb bags of plant sap. They're easy prey for other insects. And when I take action, because they're usually very targeted on the lushest, newest stems of the roses, I try to keep my action targeted too. A sharp spray of water for manual removal and just rubbing your thumb against the back of the leaves will mostly get rid of the big colonies of aphids. And then I follow up with an insecticidal soap, which is just potassium salts of fatty acids. In this case, not dish soap. Dish soap is far more damaging. It's a detergent, but you're actually looking for the stuff that's labeled as insecticidal soap or Castile soap, which is potassium salts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Good point. I know that there is a lot of information out there about using dish soap, and you would not want to use it in this situation.
No, and the next one I want to talk about is spider mites, because although aphids hit me early on, I usually ignore them for the most part. Spider mites are a little harder to ignore when they get going, when it gets warm here. They're smaller, they're more evasive, and many gardeners will first notice them by the discoloration and stippling on the foliage. And then on close inspection, you'll see the webbing underneath the leaves, and they're far more prevalent in warm, dry weather. And for me, that's much later in the season. Mm-hmm. In extreme outbreaks, I use something called that Prisimilis mite, which does occur naturally, but you can actually buy them off of Amazon or buy them off of suppliers. Especially in the US, you have a good supply chain on that. And they work pretty well, especially in that warmer part of the season. You do have to apply them directly to the plants. They usually come in a carrier of bran, and you have to apply that directly to where the spider mites are, because they don't really travel in your garden a whole lot. And so they actually work pretty well at overwhelming the populations of the pest mites. The other thing I will say as sort of a last resort for spider mites is wettable sulfur with good coverage is quite good. And it also helps to keep the foliar diseases off. So it helps to discourage powdery mildew and black spots. So sulfur is on my good list.
Oh, yes. But you did bring up the dreaded fungal diseases.
Yes,
so
I sure did.
Go deeper into that one for us, because every rose grower, even if you don't know what a mite is, you know what black spot is.
That's right, and I deal with it quite a lot here because we're just north of Seattle. We're quite moist, even during the growing season, and I think the first line of defense there for me is good sanitation. And sanitation, I mean pruning early in the season for good air circulation, keeping the plant from becoming too congested and having the leaves sort of sit right up on top of each other. And then also the cleanup and removal of infected leaves, those ones that you see if you can get them off quite early, then they don't spread the disease around the plant so much. Also the ones that drop to the ground. You have to get those off the ground. And that's my first line of defense. For susceptible varieties, and this goes back to that point of being targeted in your approach, because I have a color-coded system in my yard, in my stock field, and I have a little black mark that I have beside the name of each of the plants that I have that I know get black spot, and then I hit them with a preventive spray. In that case, it is that potassium bicarbonate, and I also have some chitosan in there. And those are all natural. I mean, these are not hard chemicals. I have no problem having that around my family. And again, I just focus those on the ones that I know will be a problem. And here I'm talking about, there's a hybrid perpetual that I have to grow because it's beautiful. It's Souvenir de Dr. Germain, but it is very susceptible to black spot. And so it's worth the extra effort for me, but it needs that extra help.
Yes, I have a few divas too. I try to eliminate those unless you really get into my heart and soul. If you have a big problem, I'm going to shovel prune. But there just are some that require more of me, and it's worth it.
Absolutely. Now, powdery mildew is another foliar disease that you're going to deal with occasionally, and it's kind of usually I see, and this may not square with everybody's experience, but with black spot, I see that during the wetter stretches of the season. In powdery mildew, I usually see that when my plants are moisture stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so the same spray that I use there, the potassium bicarbonate with chitosan, will help, but also rotate it with that wettable sulfur, because that wettable sulfur that you're using for the spider mites also doubles up as a way of discouraging powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is definitely more prevalent in like I say, higher moisture and higher humidity because it breeds quicker that way. But ironically, it's also much more likely to attack roses that are unevenly watered or dried out or moisture stressed.
I think that's so true. Talk a little bit about the unevenly watered scenario.
Right. Because you get deeper into the summer, and obviously you have to watch your watering. And if they get a little bit stressed out like that, it really lowers the plant's defenses against any of these foliar diseases. So it is something that you have to just, you don't water the same way in the spring. Early in the spring, I almost don't have to water at all. We're such a moist climate. But getting into the summer, it's important to keep your plants evenly moist. And I usually use a mulch across the base of my plants as well to help to maintain that moisture level around the base of the plant.
It's so true. I think that we need to get in the practice of visiting our roses so that we know when stress is occurring. And, we don't want to let things go too far, like lack of water and those kinds of things, till they're already to the stress point. So anyway, I noticed that you had mentioned that you used the yellow sticky cards. Could you mention a little bit about those?
Well, sure. So when you talk about, for instance, this watering stress, one of the ways it shows up on your plants is that the lower and center leaves will start to go yellow. And the bad insects actually use yellow leaves as a sign that a plant is stressed out enough that they can attack it. And so yellow sticky cards are, available everywhere, and you can just place them in your greenhouse. You can place them in your landscape, and they will be a good monitoring device to attract those the bad guys, and you can use them as a count. So if you go there every week or every 2 weeks and just count off, okay, what I'm seeing on here right now is just a ton of thrips, or I'm seeing whitefly on here, or a leaf hopper. It gives you an idea of what the problem is on your plant. But at the same time, even though it is just there to indicate the problem, it's also trapping the bad guys. So I think it's a win-win overall.
Oh, I think these things are fantastic. I mean, it shocks me every time. You put them out, put them around, even, where I'm starting seeds. It is amazing to me. One day you go out and it's like, oh boy, look at all these guys. So great indicator of what's going on. Absolutely.
And in addition to keeping, doing that monitoring, so you see, when your hot spots are, when you have to take action, and maintaining a good moisture supply, I would say there's something to be said for just keeping your roses well fed. And by well fed, I don't mean pushing tons and tons of lush growth all season. Higher nitrogen fertilizers can actually make your roses a little more susceptible to outbreaks of pests. What I'm talking about here is having a continual supply of organic release fertilizers at the base of the plant. So I definitely use alfalfa, but manure, compost, anything that feeds the soil and feeds it consistently throughout the season helps the plant to stave off pests. So I like that. And when it goes to alfalfa, I know a lot of people make up these alfalfa potions that they make up, the compost teas and that. And that's not something I go for, but I do add about a scoop, 1 cup scoop of alfalfa to each plant early in the season. And because my climate is so wet, I don't really have to water it in so much. It turns to mush all on its own. But if you wanted to, you could wet it first and then put it at the base of your plants. But about a scoop, one cup to each plant, just to get the season started. Then after that, I'll consider top dressing with a liquid feed, or managing it from there onward.
I know that you use some other green fertilizers and liquid fish. So tell us a little bit about those fertilizers.
Yeah, and I have nothing against people using the conventional fertilizers or the chemical fertilizers, particularly the slow release like Osmocote can be
Hmm.
great in a container for container gardening because you get that controlled release over a long season and you don't have the volume of soil there. But when you're growing plants out in the garden, it's nice to use things like liquid fish or alfalfa, manure, compost, all those ones that take some time and they feed the microbes in the soil and improve the soil condition as you're going through. And combine those with a good organic mulch, and here I'm talking about wood chips or that kind of thing. And what you end up with is a soil area underneath your rows that's very active, and adding continuous feed to your roses instead of having this boom and bust that you sometimes see with the chemical fertilizers. Again, nothing against the chemical fertilizers, but I think the organic fertilizers in an in-ground situation are probably your better bet.
How many times a year would you say that you do an active fertilizing of your roses?
I do one good fertilizing early in the season, right at the time that they're coming out of dormancy. And then after that, I just use the liquid feeding as I see necessary. And it's the same approach I use with the pests. I don't take action on the pests unless I think it's necessary. It's the same thing with feeding. If I see them starting to slow down, starting to yellow out a little bit, and they don't have the vigor they used to have, then I'll add a little more food. But I don't do, this is probably sacrosanct to say on a rose podcast, but I don't do a regular feeding. There is no routine. There's no once a month or once every 2 months. Although I do walk my roses regularly and then see what their needs are.
Absolutely. I love the walking part. But I can tell you that as I've grown more roses through the year, I give them less fertilizer just probably because it takes a lot of time. But I can tell you also that my roses haven't seemed to notice. So I think I probably did a whole lot more. And while I'm sure in some respects I appreciated it, but they're still beautiful without it. So it isn't as necessary as we think it is. We hear of these systems and all the different things that people can do, and you can, but I'm finding more and more that it isn't necessary.
Yeah, I'm 100% there with you. I think early on, I hear about people doing transplanting of roses, and I hear about all the stuff they're throwing into that planting hole, and I'm going to go with manure, and I'm going with bone meal, and I've got like this and that and the other thing, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, it can go overboard, and particularly when a plant is trying to settle in like that, transplant shock is a real thing. And you're not making it any easier by adding a bunch of soluble salts to that planting hole. So I go with less is more. You plant it in the native soil, and you can always top dress later. It's not like it's like cooking. You can always add more salt, but you can't take it out.
Oh, absolutely! What a good analogy. Well done. Okay, so you grow all of these roses, and I want to know, what are your favorites?
If you asked me on a different day, my answer would probably be different. As it is right now, probably jumping to mind, Jacques Cartier is that's a Portland rose that's mid-size, and just to me is the epitome of the perfect garden rose. It has those old-fashioned blooms that somebody like David Austin would have been trying to reproduce in the way that they are. But this is the real deal. Beautiful scent, nicely quartered, very flat blooms, and consistent performer, mid-size. I just love that rose. Second one is a Canadian rose called Prairie Peace. And if you know, the Peace rose has those wonderful blends of yellows and pinks. This one is Prairie Peace that is based on the Scots roses breeding. Is super, super tough and hardy. I think it's zone 2 or zone 3. So I know people who grow in those zones are always looking for something that's a little more colorful. And Prairie Peace has that. It has that beautiful peace-looking rose. It's not formed the same way. It's more of an open cup shape with wavy petals, kind of a grapefruit scent, but just a gorgeous rose and super, super tough. Third on my list, and you can stop me at any point here, but I have to mention Abraham Darby, because I know there are probably David Austin roses that are more refined than Abraham Darby, but it has stood the test of time. It is such a tough, high performing apricot blooms. I couldn't say enough about it, and it always does wonderfully in my garden.
It is a gorgeous color. It is absolutely stunning. I had it many years ago. I don't remember what happened to it, but it is not there now. So go on, give us a couple more.
Well, I'll give you one more anyway. Is Renda Violet, which is a hybrid perpetual with purple blooms, and it's of the old garden rose, habit, with the sort of flat, not glossy foliage, but the sort of matte foliage, but has that sort of that wonderful blend, because the hybrid perpetuals were a blend of everything that came before them. It has that wonderful blend of the Gallica qualities and the Damask qualities, great scent, and it's just a superstar performer in my garden. So I've come around to that one being one of the favorite. Every time I stop by it, I'm always impressed by it.
I am too. I have that one. It's absolutely stunning, and I had to move it. And it's a big rose. It gets some size on it. I had to move it a couple of years ago, and I thought, oh, it's going to take it forever. It did not. It was stunning last summer, and I kind of forget about it until I look at pictures, and I go, oh my goodness, what's that? And I mean, it is a beautiful, beautiful rose. Good choice.
Yeah, and thornless too.
Yeah, I kind of forgot that. Oh, it's so good to have a thornless rose. And there are several in my garden. It's good to have them in those places where people like to gather. So that's a nice bonus.
For sure.
Well, Jason, this has been so great. I'm sure our listeners have made all kinds of notes. Thanks so much for joining me today. And thanks for all the work you do, because I'm sure it is work to get the message out so well on YouTube.
Oh, it's very much my pleasure. People thank me in the comments on the videos all the time, and I always say the same thing, but it's always sincere. It is absolutely my pleasure to interact with everybody, and especially, I mean, nothing against those people who already come around to roses, but it gives me a special joy to reach out to people who have never really considered the hobby before, and now they're getting excited and trying it for the first time. That's what gets me fired up.
Oh, it's excellent. You're demystifying and giving them the tools that they need to be successful, and that is a huge, huge gift. And I also want to thank you for including us in your Rose Influencer video.
Well, the work you guys have been doing over the years is amazing. And so I can return the compliment in spades, but I won't embarrass you.
Well, thank you so much. And friends, if you were taking notes on products that Jason mentioned today, he has all of them listed in his Amazon store. So it's very easy for you to find them. I'm assuming there's a link on YouTube. I know there's a link on the website for the Rose Farm. So it'll be easy for you to find. And friends, it's so good to have you with us today. I hope you enjoyed today's show as much as I did. I feel more than ready to get this season started. So until next time, happy gardening.
You've been listening to the Rose Chat podcast with Chris Van Cleve and Teresa Byington, expert rose gardeners who want to help you achieve the rose garden of your dreams. Don't miss an episode. Listen anytime on our website at rosechatpodcast.com or listen on the go via the Rose Chat app on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. Share this podcast with your social networks and join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by using the hashtag RoseChat. Join us next time for another edition of the Rose Chat podcast. The Rose Chat podcast is a production of the Rose Chat Media Group, Birmingham, Alabama.